There are people right now walking around with undiagnosed symptoms and all types of chronic illness, and they are frustrated with their day-to-day health because they have no idea what's wrong. I want to start this episode by saying a big thank you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. I hope that the topics that we are covering are thought-provoking. They're motivating you to live the healthiest lifestyle that you can. And with this series, I'm excited to go really deep and understand all the nuances of toxins and what they're doing to our bodies. In this episode, we are not necessarily giving remedies or looking for cures, but more uncovering causes and looking for reasons as to why people are dealing with sickness. And at that point, my hope is that you go and study and research and learn and speak with someone who is helping you on your health journey, a professional, to find exact answers and to not leave anything on the table. So there is a major buzzword that's really starting to circulate all over social media, all over YouTube. It's just everywhere right now. And it is the phrase cellular toxicity. You know, this is not a new thing. However, it is new to mainstream. And I love it when people begin to bring these health topics to the forefront because it really gives us an opportunity to dive into them and understand them. So really, cellular toxicity has been going on ever since there's ever been a single pollutant in our world. But we are living in such a fast-paced, high-stress, technology-driven, and materialistic world right now that production and the products that we use and the lifestyles that we have and the food that we eat is leading to more and more problems. So let's introduce the idea of cellular toxicity. Of course, we know that our entire body is made up of cells. We have somewhere between 50 and 70 trillion cells in our body. And whenever cells start to misfire and do not work properly, that's when we start to have a breakdown in our organs and in our systems. So the idea of cellular toxicity is that individual cells become toxic for various reasons, and then they don't function properly. Maybe they're not producing enough energy. Maybe they're not getting rid of the waste products. Maybe they're not absorbing nutrients. There can be lots of different things that make a cell toxic. These cells are the very building blocks of our entire body. So it makes sense that if cells begin to become toxic and they don't function properly, and this begins to multiply throughout our body, that we're going to have problems. So really, cellular toxicity is not a weird concept. It's always been, but it's becoming more prominent. And the question is why? Have you ever stopped to consider on a daily basis what your cells actually have to endure? Think about from the time that you wake up. Some people don't sleep well, so they're tired, they're exhausted. They wake up, and then immediately our body is bombarded with all kinds of skincare products, shampoos, soaps, toothpaste, you name it. Chemicals are oftentimes flooding our systems. And then we go straight maybe to a quick breakfast. Maybe it's something from a box. Maybe it is a processed food. Maybe it's something that's full of added or refined sugars. This is putting toxic stress on our bodies. Then we go and we get in traffic in a vehicle and we're getting stressed out. We're running late for work. And then we get to work and we have things that we haven't finished. We have meetings, we have deadlines. All of this stuff is building our environment. And then of course, that's not even taking into consideration things like air pollution, things like electrical frequencies. All of these things are comprising an environment for us that is not leading to health. So what are some of these unseen threats? Let's start with environment. Even in our homes, the environment, unfortunately, can sometimes be way more toxic than we expect it to be. Just because we keep our homes clean, we think everything's fine, but there are some hidden things lurking that are compounding upon us every single day. Take, for example, VOCs. A VOC stands for a volatile organic compound, and they are extremely hazardous to our health. VOCs can be found in everything from deodorant to shampoos, cosmetics, The list goes on. It can also be found in things like cleaning solutions, paint, floor cleaners, carpet. It really permeates a lot of our home. A second danger to think about, and I know this one sounds crazy, but it's just plastic in general. Whenever you put food in plastic and it gets really hot, whether it be in the microwave or in the dishwasher, whatever the case may be, the chemicals in the plastic begin to release. A lot of times this is a root cause of toxicity in our lives. Next on the list is pesticides. Pesticides don't just harm insects, right? If it's powerful enough to make an insect sick, it's going to have effect on our bodies. Of course, if you're buying non-organic fruits and vegetables, we know already that it's full of pesticides. And in all honesty, even the organic produce is likely to contain trace amounts of pesticides. Next on the list is fungi, right? Fungus, mold, spores, things like this that begin to accumulate in our house and we're unaware. And those things release into the air and we begin to breathe them in. Another to think about is formaldehyde. Okay, formaldehyde is a very common household hazard and people don't realize it because it's not very well thought of or well known. Formaldehyde tends to be most prominent in building and construction materials that we find in our home, but also can be found in some cleaning products. Another thing that we've really got to consider on the list are some of the practical things that we use on a daily basis. For example, toothpaste. If you are not using an all-natural toothpaste, it is full of chemicals. Things like the liners in aluminum cans contain the chemical BPA. A lot of things say BPA free, but a lot of them don't specify, which tells us that they're probably there. Shampoo contains things like parabens, right? Candles that are scented. If it's not a candle that's 100% essential oil, it is likely that it has these chemicals in it. And then there are heavy metals, things like arsenic, cadmium, mercury, lead, aluminum. A lot of times these very heavy metals are found in tap water, drinking water, the things that we bathe in. It's all in there and our body is soaking it up. In addition to these environmental dangers, there's also some dietary dangers. We've talked a little bit about how some of these chemicals can creep into our food, but there's some more things to consider. I know that in our culture, it is very common to not cook at home. It's very common to go out to grab something to eat that's quick, that's convenient. But the major problem with that is that we do not know where that's being sourced and what's being put into it. We're starting to get a pretty good indication by seeing all the chronic health issues, right? I want you to consider for a moment, just as we've talked about pesticides and herbicides, there's also other things in our diet that are contributing to sickness. Our bodies were not intended to digest chemicals and process chemicals. So whenever we're eating processed food that comes from a box, not that's living food, it has been synthesized somehow. Nutrients have been taken out, things have been put in, additives. Whenever you read the label on the back of a food product, if it has more than 1, 2, or 3 ingredients, you need to start to question, why am I eating this? And some of these things, I don't even know what they are. If you don't know what it is, it's probably not food. You know, my dad said to me one time, we were visiting another country, and he said, on this little trip, I'm going to eat like you do and see how I feel. And after 4 or 5 days of eating the way I do, which was fairly clean and plant-based, he's like, man, I feel so much better. I have so much more energy. And he kind of stopped in his tracks and what he said, and he realized, he said, I guess that's what food is supposed to do, give you energy. And I was like, well, yeah. And he goes, so I guess if I eat and I don't have energy, maybe I'm not eating food. And I was like, wow, what a revelation. Just because we eat it doesn't make it food. And so we've got to really start to look into what am I eating? And if what I am eating is not an actual food ingredient, I need to question why I'm eating it. And then lastly, there's lifestyle choices. Sometimes our lifestyle feels like it kind of happens to us. But at the end of the day, I do believe that it is choices that we make. And sometimes we find ourselves stuck in these choices, and we've got to make some really difficult choices to get out of it. But you've got to consider things like your job, the stress levels that you're under, the environment, the way that you're treated. You've got to consider your family life, the expectations that you have, the goals that you have. Are they attainable, or are they causing you stress? The expectations you have for your children, are they something that your children can actually live up to, or are you putting a burden on them that's really in the end just stressing them and you? There are so many factors. Many of us have dealt with emotional trauma. Many of us have dealt with physical traumas. All of these things impact our cellular health. So what happens is the body can handle some of this stress, but when the abuse, if you will, becomes chronic over long periods of time and more cells begin to toxify, we start to see the results. So when we're talking about cellular toxicity, really what we're talking about is the process in which cells begin to not function at their highest state. They're not healthy anymore. They have toxins, and those toxins are prohibiting the cell from performing its function. So reflect on your daily lifestyle, on your daily choices, and ask yourself this question. Could my pursuit of convenience, of comfort, of safety, could my pursuit of success be leading me down a road of toxicity? There are some symptoms that are very closely associated with cellular toxicity, and I think that they're worth discussing. A lot of them seem very common. They just seem like they're a part of life. But in the end of the day, not feeling our best is not just a part of life. Like, we don't have to feel bad just because we're getting older. We don't have to have inflammation or sickness just because we're getting older. Let's go through a list of some of these symptoms that are not always because of cellular toxicity, but can often be associated. The first one is brain fog. Whenever you just have trouble concentrating, you can't remember things, maybe you just feel like you're not on top of your game, you're not at your best. That could be a symptom of cellular toxicity. Another one would be fatigue. If you can't make it through your day without just feeling overwhelmed. I know a lot of times when I used to drive home from work, I would be falling asleep. This is not healthy, and it is not normal. So no matter how much you sleep, you just feel tired. That's fatigue, right? Also, I think one that's really important that we don't want to overlook is chronic pain. Just inflammation that is always ongoing. Maybe I always have that lower back pain, or I've always got, the pain in my shoulder, or whatever the case may be. That is a warning sign. The pain is telling you there's a problem there. One of the things that I have truly come to understand in my health journey is that I'm toxic. And I hate to admit that because it kind of sounds like, I failed. But the fact is, it doesn't matter how hard we try. Toxins are invading our bodies. And so we have to create an environment where our body can handle it, and we have to avoid getting overloaded. With so many of the things that I've been through, I know that I am fighting a level of toxicity. And I believe that as I continue to get my life on track, health-wise, I believe that my cells will cleanse themselves, and I will become less toxic, and I will become more healthy. It is a process. So as you're listening, you might consider, I think I'm toxic. Well, maybe you are. It's nothing to get discouraged about, but it's important to be able to recognize it so that you can start identifying the triggers, identifying the toxins, and then removing them from your life. What if the root of all of your health problems comes from a toxic environment? What if that is the very breeding ground for the problems that you now face? Would it be worth it to explore this topic? And would it be worth it for you to investigate to see how you can clean up your environment and clean up your lifestyle to see if your cells begin to purge and you can reverse it? I know for me on this journey, this is a major part of my focus. So cellular toxicity wasn't even in my vocabulary until about a year ago. And I started doing research because my chronic pain was becoming worse and worse. And that's when I started to stumble across so many different doctors, so many different healthcare professionals, so many different researchers talking about the damaging effects of our environment. And I started to just take a inventory of my life. And I realized, look, I can't deny this. I for sure have been exposed to multiple toxins on every level. And there is definitely a moment in that journey where it kind of sinks in. Like, there is so much more to what I'm dealing with than just simply, I have this problem, fill in the blank with whatever. In Western medicine, doctors tend to label you based on whatever your diagnosis is. So, if you have a tumor in your neck, you have cancer, right? If your blood sugar is high, you have type 2 diabetes. I really despise that, because I believe there are people who now take those labels and they own them. And now they go around, and the way they introduce themselves, the way that they talk about themselves, well, I have diabetes, I have cancer, I have heart disease. And it becomes this label. And you are not your disease. That is a warning sign, and it is your body showing you that there is a system of problems that need to be addressed. And as you listen to this podcast, I hope that, for one, you can pick yourself up out of that victim mentality and realize, I and the choices that I have made most likely got me into this situation. Now, I realize that for some people, it is unfortunate and they had no contributing factor. Maybe it's a genetic disorder. Maybe it's something that's happened to them in their life that there was just no control. I understand that, and I'm not trying to minimize that in any way. But most people that I've encountered, and myself included, I think that it's lifestyle choices, and I think that it's oftentimes things that we have done to ourselves. And that's really who I'm speaking to. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where life happened to you, and maybe you were born with a genetic problem or something like that, it's not to say that this couldn't be a step in your healing. So with a heart of humility and understanding where you're coming from, I know that it's easy to feel like, I'm just dealing with this pain, I'm just dealing with this, I'm dealing with that, and it begins to define you. But we have to stop that mentality. One of the best things that ever happened to me was when I realized that my choices had created an environment that made cancer. If cancer had just happened to me, then I would truly be a victim, and there would be nothing I could do about it. I don't like that outcome. But if I can realize there were factors involved in my life over a period of decades that have contributed to my body expressing cancer, now I realize this did not just happen. It happened as a result. It was a result of things that I was doing to my body. Now I can reverse it. Now I can change it. Now there is hope, because it didn't just happen and I was dealt a bad hand. And so that's why I started exploring the path of cellular toxicity, was because if my cells are toxic, which I believe that they are, and I'm on a mission to detoxify, but it's a process. But if my cells are toxic, then I let the toxins in, let me figure out how to get the toxins out. I'm not saying that it's easy, but it is possible. So I think one of the most important things that I've learned on this journey, it's not just about getting answers. It's about asking questions. It's about asking the right questions. And maybe today you've got to start asking the question of, what is causing me to be and feel so toxic? And then we can take it a whole nother step further. There are millions of people in this country and then beyond America that are walking around in a high level of toxicity, and they don't feel well. They have undiagnosed symptoms. They have chronic illness. And we've created an environment, we've created a society that makes it almost impossible to avoid the toxins. But on top of that, we don't even know they're there. It is important that we bring this to the forefront of conversation. Up until this point, it gets frustrating because whenever you start talking to someone about like, oh, you shouldn't be using toothpaste because it has fluoride in it, or, you don't use that deodorant because it's got aluminum. then they freak out. They're like, well, what am I supposed to use? They don't realize there are so many alternatives. It's easy to make your own. Our health is more valuable than the few extra minutes that it takes to prepare a healthy skincare product at home. But it's about education. People don't know that there are options. We have been desensitized into thinking that convenience is normal, and therefore anything that takes a little bit of effort is quackery. It's not. It's about preservation. It's about perseverance. It's about caring about our bodies and our families enough to say, I'm willing to do something that's non-conventional, that's not traditional, to ensure the safety and the health of me and my family. We must normalize an environment where people are striving to make healthy decisions, not just doing what's simple and not just doing what's easy, not just doing what's normal or convenient or traditional. The irony is the things that we think that are traditional, that we've been doing and our parents did, go back 2 or 3 more generations, they've never heard of it. That was not normal to them. They were doing things the old way. But we somehow think now that the old way is primitive, that it doesn't have value because technology has advanced us past that. But I would say that we are missing out on some of the benefits of taking time to take care of ourselves. So as we close this episode, I want you to consider the factors that are either promoting a healthy environment for you and your family or that are possibly contributing to toxicity. And understand that as our cells over time experience these toxins, that it begins to build up. It is a compound effect. And we oftentimes don't even realize it until we have a disease, until we see the outcome of all of that toxicity. So the challenge is that you go and you begin to take inventory of your lifestyle, whether it be environmental, whether it be dietary, whether it be emotional, whether it be lifestyle choices. You have to start making a list of those things that you know are potentially detrimental to your body and start figuring out ways to substitute, to make changes, to eliminate, to put new things, healthy things into place. My hope and my desire is that you live a healthy life, free from drugs, free from dependence, free, full of energy, full of life, and that you can pass that down to your children and your grandchildren. But in order for that to happen, we have to educate ourselves. We have to be the change. We can't just do things the way that they've always been done because that doesn't mean that that's what's best. We have to find what our new normal is and make sure that it is the best normal for our lives. Cellular toxicity, unfortunately, is prominent in our lifestyles, and we have to be aggressive about identifying it and making the changes necessary to allow ourselves to have a healthy environment. As we continue on throughout this series over the coming months, we are going to hear stories of people who are dealing with toxicity in their life so that we can begin to gain insight and understand how toxins are affecting us and what we can do to avoid them. Thank you for listening to the Healing Conspiracy Podcast. I am so grateful that you took your time, and I hope that today's episode was thought-provoking and that it has energized you to start moving forward to make the healthiest lifestyle possible for you and your family. If you haven't already, I would love for you to follow the podcast. Also, hop over to our YouTube channel. We've got the podcast on YouTube, as well as some very exclusive content that only takes place on the YouTube channel. Would love for you to subscribe and follow that as well. If you're listening on KFred Radio, thank you so much, and know that this program airs every Tuesday through Friday at 7:30 a.m. Pacific. Make sure you follow us on all social media platforms. And until next time, seek for the truth, and it will set you free.